Good evening, everybody. It's Bob Weathers here, and I'm with my dear friend, Doug Prater. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Bob. Good to see you today.
Nice to see you too. Thank you. Doug is back on the East Coast, so I appreciate all the more you're joining us a bit on the late side, Doug. Thank you. I so appreciate what you bring, and it's a privilege to have you here with us. Thank you. Yeah. We're presenting part of our series, ongoing series here at Vitality Project, which is trying to provide solid insights into the process of addiction and looking at it from multiple perspectives. I know you and I share a similar value for multiple perspectives, Doug. So we look at addiction and recovery, for that matter, from a biological perspective for sure, and certainly a psychological perspective, owing to my background and our respective interests, and also include spiritual resources and other perspectives. So we're not limited to a single perspective here at all. And one of the things I like to do in the daily posts is to provide homework exercises that will get people, including me, more engaged. It's almost like a scratch and sniff way of learning that we can learn experientially. And today's post has to do with asking each one of us to see how we can personally relate to addiction. And we've been talking about in the posts about a cycle of active addiction that becomes more and more dominating to the point where it's almost 24/7, moving from a state of craving, oftentimes preceded by a state of unrest, emotional distress, or some other situation, and a craving for relief comes. And we've found ways of relieving that. For some, it's with alcohol or other drugs. And for others, it's other behaviors, everything from working too much to eating too much to spending too much, and on it goes. And I've also included in here something that I've really appreciated from our mutual friend, 𝗪 talking about attitudes that can become addictive. He writes a lot about ideological addiction as just one example. So all kinds of attitudes. And the point is to level the playing field so that we can have a honest conversation of what it's like to feel like out of control. And if we can have that conversation without shaming one another, and then, God willing, find some antidotes, some more effective means for handling our stress than some of the coping strategies that we've developed, which have become costly. So tonight I want to invite you, dear Douglas, and I and me to talk for a few minutes, maybe model how we can relate to being in this cycle of addictive behaviors, and maybe to humanize it by talking about how it's always contextual. It's always in the context of triggers. Sometimes the triggers are outside. Sometimes it's a visual trigger. Sometimes it's a stressful interaction. Other times the triggers are from inside, and they can certainly be biochemical. I'm not denying the fact that I know this for me with my addiction to drugs like alcohol and certainly other drugs too. I got to a place where it was chemistry that was driving it. So that was, that was clearly the case. In fact, most of the people I work with who are in recovery from severe addiction will tell me that people will say things to them like, "Why do you have to party so much?" And thank you, Doug. They go, "I don't think this is exactly a party. They're just trying to stave off getting really sick." In fact, that becomes the operative term for withdrawal, is just being sick. And so I know that that's the case, but oftentimes also stress is in the picture. In fact, stress is the #1 trigger for relapse. And so I just want to talk about it with you for a few minutes, Doug, and just anything you're willing to share, any insights at all would be really valuable. So there it is to start with.
Well, it's definitely a post that I related a lot to, topic that I can relate a lot to, as I'm sure all of us who have struggled with addiction, and even those who haven't struggled with necessarily acute addiction to substances have been trapped in that cycle, as you definitely pointed out there. And I really appreciate the point too, that it's not about partying so much either, at least when you're down in the depths of it. It's reaching for a change of state, to stop feeling the way that you were feeling, the way that I was feeling. I know
it's well said.
Was absolutely the case for me. And the worst part, I struggled in recovery for many years before it took. I relapsed chronically for a long time. And the problem was that I'd get through the sickness after that acute withdrawal period and start to be feeling better. And as the clarity would return, so would the shame of what I had done and the situation I was in and the harm that I had caused, and difficulty coping with that in a healthy way and finding healthy means to do it then would form another trigger to start the cycle all over again. I had to escape that, and I knew a way to do it. It worked for a few minutes anyway before the cycle would start all over again. And the key became for me figuring out healthier ways to do that, healthier ways to change the state, whether that be dealing with something psychological or engaging a spiritual practice, or I found music was an incredible tool for me to get me out of my head, my thinking shame mind, and into a different state where I could express something creatively. I did that through journaling. I did that through movement. But certainly there was a lot of that. I had triggers of, I mentioned guilt and shame. Certainly loneliness was one, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of abandonment. All of those contributed to it. And it really was something that I didn't feel like I had any control over. It's like a demon jumps into your brain and takes control of your body. And before I knew it, my car was parked in front of the liquor store again. And I had no recollection of how I got there. And so it becomes a matter of knowing yourself well enough to, number one, avoid those kind of triggers when you can, and knowing how to catch them early enough to stave it off and change directions before you start swirling down that funnel, as it were.
Yeah. There's so much useful information you're providing, not only about the interiority of the experience. I just think you and I both know this, and I think anybody that knows addiction, particularly severe or long-term addiction, knows that feeling of absolute out of control, cannot withstand the cravings, cannot withstand it. And it looks like weakness from the outside, and it feels like it from the inside. In fact, the shame that attended that for me, I think you're speaking to the same point, the shame for feeling like I had been competent in so many areas in my life, and I was rendered absolutely incompetent for this. Whatever effectiveness I had at self-discipline was just flattened by this. I really appreciate you naming that. But not leaving it just at that, but also that there are things that we can do, that we can build up other resources. You mentioned journaling. I know you and I both share a deep love for music. I know you're an author, a writer, as well as kind of almost like preemptive measures, like what can I do to catch this before it gets too far? I oftentimes will use the going over the waterfall. I have this sense if I catch the water before it goes over the waterfall, but once it reaches a certain point, this is certainly my experience in active addiction, it was all over but the shouting. It was like I just couldn't. It was just done. And I also really related to you're talking about finding this is the image I had as you were talking. It's like the car develops an automatic pilot or something, and all of a sudden I'm at the liquor or I'm at the dealer or whatever the addiction is. It doesn't matter. I was talking with a staff member this week at one of the treatment centers, and I so appreciated her being willing to be transparent. She has a predilection for chocolate donuts. And she was talking about it, and she was describing the exact same experience that you and I know, Doug. It happens to be a different substance. In some ways, it kind of goes under the radar. Right. My whole family's in the medical profession, and I think they might challenge the conventional thought that eating chocolate donuts is without consequence. It's hugely a consequence for lots of disorders. We'll go into those right now, but I just appreciated her joining in. It was a conversation with people that had been addicted to meth or to heroin. And I don't feel like that anybody disrespected or minimized her talking about chocolate donuts, because that out of control quality she gets very well. And it's been a serious issue for her. Yeah.
People will often jokingly refer to being a chocoholic, but it certainly can induce those same kind of cravings. It affects your dopamine and your other neurotransmitters for sure. And there are not only the health consequences of it, but there are consequences to mood too, as your blood sugar swings wildly, and it really can put you on that cycle for sure.
Yeah. That whole blood sugar thing became a problem for me with my drinking, especially when I got into such advanced alcohol abuses that my in addition to the effect of alcohol and intoxication and withdrawal was just the whole up and down I had with my sugar. And I've always been sensitive, kind of mildly kind of subclinically hypoglycemic. Well, you want to send your blood sugar into a frenzy, just drink as much as I drank. So
But in that case, and in all the cases, there are preventative measures that we talked about a little bit. And for me, the most important thing, I mean, there are the daily practices that I'm so fond of and would talk about for hours, but I think the most important thing was finding a strong enough why, finding a source of meaning to really attach to that allowed me to bootstrap the willpower that I didn't have, because there was something more important than the way I felt in the moment, that I was willing to go through the acute suffering of whatever mood or neurochemistry or unpleasant feeling I was dealing with. And it took a long time to get there, because one of the things that being an addiction will do as you move through that downward spiral is take those things from you. And that's, the hopelessness that is created, and rediscovering a source of that is absolutely necessary to move us forward and move us out of that.
I always think around, I fully agree with you, Doug, and thank you for articulating it so clearly. I always think around this whole issue of the why. I always think of the quote that's attributed to the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, he who has a why to live for can deal with virtually any how. And his point was, he wasn't talking about specifically about addiction recovery, but his point was the specifics, the mechanics of how you and I are going to recover, I believe will more or less take care of themselves if I have that why, a why to live for, as he put it. And if I don't have a why to live for, all the mechanics in the world, all the great workbooks, all the great practical suggestions, they'll fall on deaf ears. There's not enough impetus to do it. If you think addiction, it takes away our birthright. And so I've got to find some way to track back to my North Star, back to my birthright. It seems to me, through hell or high water, and it's a lot of both of those in recovery. I've got to find some root in that if I'm going to make it back out of addiction. And I think that Nietzsche was right. I think that you're right for sure. Absolutely. I sometimes will ask in groups, Doug. I'll have groups of 15 or 20, sometimes more, and I'll just ask. It's very touching to me. I'll ask them that question. It's like, what's your why? And I mentioned the size of the groups because the answers will be utterly non-redundant. It's pretty amazing to me. You can get that many individual expressions of what is the value or the purpose or the meaning behind my life, much less my recovery, but my life. I'm always very touched by it. It's very moving. It's awe-inspiring, because you get people in early recovery, because most of the people I work with are in they're just a week or two out of detox, and many of them are, a month, maybe a couple months down the road at all. It's very, very early recovery, and yet I rarely can. In fact, I can't think of a time where I've had somebody say, I have to pass. I just don't have any idea. That's pretty striking to me. I don't think I really realize that till right now. People always will be able to access that, even if it's been completely inaccessible,
right,
in their addiction. It's really moving. Yeah.
There's always something there for sure. And I applaud you for encouraging that and getting people to share it. I know in the depth of addiction too, it can be easy to lose sight of that, to forget that, to think it's impossible, to think it's gone, to think that it's foolish to try even a certain thing. And as clarity starts to return in recovery too, that meaning can grow and expand and change in beautiful directions that I never could have anticipated. Certainly my life turned around in ways that I never could have dreamed, never would have in my wildest dreams anticipated.
Yeah. There's this worry. I had it. I won't put it on to other people, but I hear it a lot in the rooms where I work and so on. There's a worry. Is this, in fact, I just had somebody today in one of my groups. They had somebody ask them, how long are you going to be doing this stuff? Referring to recovery. It was a family member. How long are you going to be doing this stuff? And we laughed about it together. But there is a concern oftentimes. Is this going to just be this burdensome thing, this load on my shoulders? Right. And I think it's the case for you, Doug, implied by even what you just said right now. And I can vouch for the fact it's the case for me, is that, how did Jesus say it? He said something like, come to me, ye that are heavy laden. My burden is light. It's something like that. And you go, well, how is his burden light? Well, I think what he's talking about is being your true self. Right. Being who Doug is really meant to be, being who Bob is really meant to be. That's, we're given a lot of resource if we align with that. And that's actually no longer a burden. It becomes its own reward. I feel like this with sobriety. Initially, sobriety was incredibly challenging for me. And I, like you, and like most people, relapse repeatedly. I mean, it's a rare case when that isn't the case. But once I got some solid sobriety under my belt, I always think it was about 9 months, about the length of a pregnancy. At about 9 months, I was enough out of post-acute withdrawal syndrome where I was beginning to recognize myself again when I looked in the mirror. Colleen, who's now my wife, said, Bobby's back. And then what I found is that the recovery practices that you and I will talk about in podcasts, hopefully unending, those became that light burden. They didn't feel burdensome to me. I like what it feels like. I love what it feels like to be inside my skin and to be clear. And sometimes, Doug, I'm depressed, and sometimes I'm agitated, and sometimes I'm this, and sometimes I eat too much, and sometimes I worry too. I mean, so I do all those things. Those count, by the way, as my addictions that I'm working on all the time. But when I'm clear of those addictions, including drugs and alcohol, I really am so grateful to God or the universe for the opportunity to have a second chance to live this fate. I'm just so grateful for it. It is its own reward.
And you mentioned the practices, and you mentioned how everyone that you've asked, that you've spoken to, has somewhere in there something that they can pull up as a source of meaning. And I have seen more and more these days that becomes difficult for people. The current culture and things, that a lack of meaning is really a widespread problem for a lot of people. In fact, that's often one of the things that can lead people to addiction, changing the way they feel in the first place, that starts that cycle. And I would say that the practices themselves are a powerful way to begin to search for that meaning. You do these things every day, every week, and you start moving towards something and learning about yourself and who you are and what you want and what's really important to you. And it's that process of looking and moving forward and working towards something that finally starts to build back some sense of meaning, or even for the first time, and allow that growth to occur. It certainly was the case for me. I appreciate very much all that we're talking into here, Doug. And one of my wishes, I've just completed a unit of writing, and it'll be the next several video posts over the next week, I think, or so, where I'll be kind of completing an arc of looking deeply at the role of shame, personal shame, as well as family and social stigma around addiction. I've taken kind of a deep dive into, and it begs the next question, or opens up into the next piece, and you're pointing in that direction, which is for the next undefined period of time, actually, because I can see this taking as long as it takes. I really want to begin looking at what then must we do
you know, and you're talking about practices. Those can be personal practices, relational practices, etc. And we'll talk about those, body, mind, and spirit. I love to do this with you because I know the value you place on these, and you know I do too. And so I want to begin talking about what can not only those of us that are in recovery from addiction, whether it's early recovery or like you and me, more down the road a bit. I want to talk about that. I also want to provide resources, and I think you and I can do a fabulous job of this. Resources that would apply no less to the loved ones of those that are in recovery. It's kind of an underexplored area. It's not to say there aren't resources in terms of self-help support groups. I think of Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. Those are great resources. But I think what we can do is fill out and supplement what programs like that are doing for family members. I've got families that I'm working with right now that include teenagers and even pre-teenagers. They need practical resources, practical practices that will make a difference. And I just this afternoon provided a training for group facilitators. I'm very close to treatment providers. I work with them. I do some training and supervision. I work alongside of them. I feel like these practices, I don't know how somebody in our field writ large, which would be all of the helping professionals, I don't know how people don't burn out without practices. It's been a godsend to me. I'm 40 years down the road, and I sometimes tease, I don't feel burnt out. I feel burnt in. That's not even a word or a phrase, but I feel like I don't feel the least bit burnt out. In fact, it's like I'm just starting to get ahead of steam. And I completely attribute that to grace and these practices. Grace and grit. How's that?
Grace and grit, yes. And, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely mind your self-care. This profession, this line of work definitely can take a heavy emotional toll on people who engage in it, and taking care of oneself in that context, and especially not even in the profession, but the friends and family, as you mentioned, of someone who's suffering from addiction is just incredibly important. I remember what a valuable resource Al-Anon was for my family when I was really struggling, and it helped them not just in their relationship with me and handling those types of things, but it helped them work through a lot of the other problems in their life too, long-standing issues in relationship and knowledge of self and willingness to express and move forward and do a lot of different things that were repaired through.
Yeah, one of my very favorite professionals in this area is Burr Cook. He lives here locally. I met him when he lived in Tennessee. He's kind of the dean of American interventionists. He's in fact, he was the president of their association a few years back, and he's known worldwide for being very interested in a family approach intervention. He doesn't see that you take Doug or Bob and send them off to a treatment center in isolation, and then expect for things to be hunky dory when Doug and Bob return home. He very much Burr is a dear soul. Burr puts it very radically. He says the whole family is in recovery, and he's not kidding. He really means that. There need to be resources from anybody that, especially within the family that's close. They all need resources of counseling, self-help support groups, process-oriented groups, psychoeducational groups where they can understand the biology of addiction in the brain, those kinds of things. And I know, like tonight, he's leading a group nearby at a hospital, and it's for families, and he's providing helpful information based in the science of addiction. And so people like him give me encouragement. They encourage me to realize that I think we're on the right track here in terms of opening up the aperture beyond just treating the individual who's in recovery directly from addiction, but to really open it up for resources. It's actually the best investment you can make long-term for the formerly addicted individual is to have a family that's knowledgeable and supportive. And like you said, Doug, have begun to work through some of the I just want to say like the avalanche. I can't think of a strong enough word. The avalanche of feelings, and all very understandable in the wake of addiction. Doug, we're going to have to stop in just a second, but I want to say this. I want to give you the final word. I want to say I'm really looking forward to where you and I will be going over the next weeks. We meet every other week here, but I really look forward to our beginning to flesh out practically what this looks like, both in terms of what's served us in our respective recovery processes, what's been of resource to our family, our families. I just look forward to our fleshing that out. I think it's going to, I want to invite people to continue to join us, because I really see us moving into a very practical phase, and I feel really committed to that. I feel like I want to start using the Vitality Project as one forum to provide really solid information. You know, my background's in clinical psychology, and so I'm going to be focusing a lot on what I know from psychology can be of service to those, whether they're in recovery or their families, but I don't want to limit it to that. And I know we're not limited to that. You and I aren't together. We have great value for a creative process as a resource, great value for spiritual practice as a resource, great value for, I used to have a friend call it radical physical self-care in terms of exercise and diet and rest, all of those. I just want to, I look forward to diving deeply into any and all of those with you, Doug. I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe you have a last word you want to say. We'll finish with this, if that's all right. Yeah.
Well, I really look forward to that as well. There's no dimension of life that is not touched by addiction in some way. And you mentioned so many of those, the psychology and radical physical care, you know, our chemistry, our bodies, our spiritual practice, our sense of purpose, our relationships especially are a huge one. And there are so many things that we can do. That has really been my mission in life. My purpose for the last years since I began is working on those things to for myself in my own life to help share them with others. So I think it's a beautiful idea and really look forward to diving into that, sharing that as well.
Your dedication shows, my friend. And I want to just put a postscript. I want to thank you for mentioning relationships, because I neglected to do that. When I think of psychology, I most often think shorthand. I can remember when I first began working in treatment centers, people would look at me cross-eyed, like, what does a psychologist do? And I just put it practically. I think we focus mainly on emotions, our emotional lives, and our relationships. So thank you for underscoring that. I look forward very much to providing resources for our relationships. If you think about it, it's you and me as being individuals in recovery, and then it's our loved ones. It's your wife and mine. And then there's the relationship. And it's like the relationship is almost like a third entity. And I know you take that seriously. And I look forward to exploring that, the two of us together. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, as always. I wish you blessings. Get some good rest. Okay. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks, dear friend. Bye-bye for now. Thank you, Douglas. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Good night. Bye-bye.